On our last episode for building a high-level creative strategy process, part 2, if you haven't listened to that, it may be beneficial for you to go back and listen to part 1 and part 2 before we go into this episode, where we're going to be focusing on the 90-day testing plan has been approved by the client. So we've done all of our research. We have onboarded the client, set expectations. We've built out the plan that we're going to be testing for the next 90 days. Now it's time to deliver. And this is where the pressure comes on for the agency, for the creative strategist, whoever it may be that's in this partnership with the client, because now you need to bring performance. And we know there's a lot of different things that can come from creative, making sure that you're on brand, making sure that you are making nice looking ads or nice ugly ads. But now it's time to get performance in the account. There's a lot of pieces that go into this. I think it could be very easy to get overwhelmed early on in a client account because you need to focus on the messaging angles that you're actually going to use in the first brief, and how can you make sure that you hit the ground running with good performance. Let's just kind of start from there. Looking at the messaging angles, you've built out a 90-day plan. You have different messaging strategies that you're going to do for each. Messaging angles are generally what we test out early on, messaging first, creative second. Mm-hmm. How do you go about deciding what messaging angles are most important for brief 1?
So I think that, at this stage, like you said, the 90-day plan's already done. So the messaging angles will be kind of defined for that 90-day period. What we tend to do is choose an amount of messaging angles that's going to obviously get us some data, but be realistic to test as well. So it kind of depends on the size of the package. But usually I would say over 90 days, you don't really want to be testing more than 3 angles, because if the angle 1 doesn't work in month 1, you don't ever run angle 1 again. You want to tweak it a bit and try it again in month 2, and potentially even tweak it again and try it in month 3. So if you get too many angles, then you can't get that level of data through. So for brief 1, I would say test all the angles that you've got in the 90-day plan, because you want to have enough times to have a few runs at it in case brief 1 doesn't work. So let's say, for argument's sake, the 90-day plan does have 3 angles. If you only do angle 1 in month 1, then you're not getting any data on angles 2 and 3, right? So I would always try and test all of the angles in every single package so that you get enough data and you have enough time to pivot and really feel like at the end of that 90 days, okay, we did everything we could with that angle and we're really confident we don't want to test that again.
And, as you're coming into this as well, part of it can depend on the amount of points or the amount of creative, we'll say, because we'll talk about points later, that you're going to be doing per brief. Mm-hmm. One thing, Charlie, actually, that we've started doing new that we're testing out with certain clients when they come on board, because we're looking at our production timelines. With the process that we've been talking through parts 1 and 2 of this series, and now in part 3 today, we are looking at the client comes on board, they fill out their onboarding form. Generally within 4 to 5 business days from that fill out of the form, they have their kickoff call. And then generally 10 to 14 business days from there, we were looking at doing full voice of customer and competitor research, building out a 90-day messaging strategy plan, and then executing on anywhere from 8 to 15 ads that way, which is a lot of work in 2-week period. And you're almost underselling the service, because you are doing voice of customer research and brand alignment and messaging strategy in 4 days. And then just saying, oh, here you go. Here's a piece of what we're doing. But that's its own service that could be tens and 20s of thousands of dollars. So what we've started to do is client comes on board, onboarding form, et cetera, kickoff call. We now span out the creative strategy research and planning phase for all of month 1. And the first brief is just based off of iterations of previous top performers in the account. So now we're just doing brief 1 iterations. Brief 2, which is in month 2, is the first brief we're executing messaging strategies on, and allowing our team a lot more time to breathe and just more time to focus on creative that will excel that way.
I think that's super smart. That was actually something in the agency I was working at prior to BrighterClick. We were literally about to just do the same thing, and I felt really strongly about this. You can't do a really great, thorough, research-backed creative strategy and develop the creatives and get to know a brand new client, all the brand guidelines, everything that you need to know, in 4 weeks.
Yeah.
You can, but point one, which you already raised, you're underselling it as a service, because you should and you could and should be putting more time into it. And then point two, if you're rushing, the chances of getting that right are very slim. And really, that first brief, you want to wow your client. Of course you do. You don't want to be rushing and giving your worst work in the first month. Quite the opposite. You want to be giving, it's like the honeymoon phase when you're dating. You want to give the best version of yourself on that first date or in that first creative package. So cutting yourself short with timelines is just a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, and I really just harp back to the idea that like it is its own service. Within the creative strategy package, there's multiple things that we're doing, and a branding agency would sell that type of research and planning for $50,000-$60,000. I mean, not even exaggerating that. So making sure that there's also just realistic timelines for your team to execute, but also just proper communication of what these services that you're delivering are that way. And so we talk about messaging themes within brief. Let's talk about iterations versus net new. I know this has been a topic that people have been kind of harping on or discussing on Twitter and on LinkedIn. I know Cody from Jones Road Beauty said that I think it was about half to 60% of your ads should focus on iterating or exploiting previous ads that were performing. And then the rest of your creative is going to go towards, I think he said about 10 to 20%, which I'm looking at his email. The math doesn't add up there, but goes towards completely new concepts. Where are you at in terms of iterations versus net new?
I think it really depends on the performance. And I think actually you and I learned this the hard way a while back with one of our clients. If the performance isn't where it needs to be, doing lots of iterations isn't going to be like significant enough to move the needle. So whilst even if performance isn't where it needs to be, of course, you're going to have top performers that you want to try and like squeeze a bit of extra juice out of in terms of performance. You absolutely should still do that. But I think from a client management perspective and from a performance perspective, in those times, you should probably lean a bit more heavily into net new so that you're taking more big swings to try and get that performance needle to move and in a bit of a kind of stronger direction to get the account where it needs to be. So yeah, I'd say it kind of depends on where performance is overall versus KPIs. But I appreciate that's a really cruddy answer when you're an agency, because from a planning perspective, net new takes a lot more time and energy and effort from not just planning, but also executing versus iterations. So I think from the agency perspective, it's probably nice to have some structure so that you can plan capacity and time it's going to take to develop that strategy and the creative. But from the brand and the client's experience, and I swear I sound like a broken record on all of these podcasts, but it's about giving a dynamic service and giving a dynamic experience based on what the account and the brand actually needs.
Yeah, 100%. And one thing that he also called out in that email that I think is very interesting and worth talking about is generally, at least from conversations I've had with agencies and conversations you and I have had as well, when we're talking about iterating, it is quote unquote top performers. So like, how can we double down on what is performing? But iterating the medium performers as well. So instead of saying, okay, only top performers get iterated, and then we're going straight to the drawing board and we're going to either swing big and perform or it's not going to go, find those ones that are medium performers and see how you can iterate those to bring those into top performers that way as well.
100%. And that really is reliant on the creative strategist being able to read data. Because if you just look at, let's say it's a client where the goal, the KPI is CPA. If you just look at CPA with a yes, it's performing, no, it's not performing, then you're going to miss the nuance. Like you wouldn't be able to identify a medium performer if all you were looking at is CPA. But if you're looking at all of the creative metrics along the way, you will know, because you might say, actually, this one didn't hit the CPA target, but the conversion rate was insane and the click-through rate was terrible. So is there anything we can do here to try and up the click-through rate whilst maintaining the conversion rate? Can we make a stronger offer? Can we put an incentive there to increase the click-through rate? Or can we like delve a bit harder into like a psychological motivator so that they feel more compelled to click the ad and take action on whatever it is, the angle that we're pushing. And likewise with other metrics, it could be the other way around. The click-through rate's great, but the conversion rate's rubbish. Okay, maybe our ad is too clickbaity. And so we're getting the clicks, but the message isn't actually powerful enough, or maybe the landing page isn't resonating with what we've said. So what can we do there to, kind of maintain the click-through rate as much as we can without being clickbaity, but getting the conversion rate up? And so if you can't read the data, you wouldn't be able to find those nuances. And yeah, I know the great one is looking at for video hook rates and hold rates. If you have a fantastic hook but a rubbish hold, what can you do after the hook that would make the hold rate better, and vice versa the other way around? So again, if you don't know the metrics that you're looking at, you just won't be able to iterate on the medium performers. And you raise such a good point, because no one talks about that. Nobody talks about those medium performers.
And your percentage of success is higher going with trying to lift a medium performer up versus going straight to the drawing board and starting from scratch. I don't have, 50% or 40%, but it's so much more difficult to get a whole net new to perform versus just trying to incrementally lift that way as well. And you mentioned something a little bit ago about dynamic service for the clients that way. One thing that we have tried to do with our creative deliverable is focus on a point system. Now, this point system could seem very complex, could seem like, oh, it's going to be difficult to explain to clients or prospective clients. I haven't had a prospective client yet that really got hung up on this. Everybody understands, and it seems to be not a concern. From an agency perspective, it does not take the same time to produce a video as it does to produce a static image. And it does not take the same cost or produce to make a UGC ad that it does a static image that way. So what we do is we look at having a point system to where, like, a base package for a client will have 15 points. The next package will have 30 points. And we've done this based off the time tracked for deliverables that way. And we will say a static image is worth 1 point, a GIF is worth 2, editing a video is worth 3, and us finding a UGC creator, paying for it, sourcing them, getting all that done is 4 points. So we follow performance. And going back to your comment on being dynamic with clients, it's following performance and giving them what is needed. And we added in the UGC to it, even though you can't necessarily get a ton of UGC with 15 points, because clients didn't always want to pay for our creative service and then want to have to pay for additional UGC just to get any UGC that way. So it's been a good lift for us as well.
Yeah, it's really handy. I love these conversations, having seen the inner workings of two different creative departments, because like we had this exact debate in the other agency where I was working at, and I really wanted to deploy a point system, but ultimately the agency decided against it because they felt exactly what you just said there, that it would be too complex and too confusing for clients, which was fine. And we went down a different route. But having worked inside your agency as well, clients love the point system, because I really find that client management is absolutely about being dynamic, but it's also about managing expectations. That is the number one route to having a successful client relationship. And the point system manages expectations so clearly. They know before they even sign what they're going to get. And then if a client decides to say, hey, we really want to focus on video, okay, well, you're only going to get 5 videos then if you have a 15-point package, and that might not be enough creative for you for the whole month. But they already know that because they knew the point system. They knew exactly what they were getting themselves in for. And I found that to be a really, really great way to manage the demands of the agency from time and cost, like you mentioned, but also, super importantly, managing the expectations of the clients at the same time.
Yeah, and like you're saying, it really shows that you're dynamic and that you are following performance, because we are doing performance creative and we care about making sure we're getting ads that are performing in the account that way. Clients might ask, or prospective clients might ask a question or two on the point system, need extra clarification, but 9.9 times out of 10, they generally say, okay, yeah, and then move on. Like, it's just on to the next conversation about the overall scope that way.
Yeah. And I think as well, like you said, it what's really fantastic is it gives all clients a chance to tap into UGC if they want to. And again, before they've even signed, before they've even agreed to work together, they know the cost of getting UGC. So they can assess whether they want to up level the points on a single month basis. Cool, we'll just double the package, double the rate we charge. And then the next month, okay, no, we've got plenty of UGC, now we're going to test, we're going to go back to just a single 15-point package. Great. Then we reduce the rate back to the 15 points, and the time and the like cost of the agency delivering it. So again, being dynamic, it's just so important.
Yeah, and having UGC in your deliverables is helpful for many ways. Performance being one, of course, but as an agency, there's benefit to having UGC to where if you know UGC performs and you know that your designer or video editor is swamped with work, you can look at sourcing UGC and having that UGC creator edit the content and send it shipped ready to go so that you can reduce workload from your actual editor. And I know, Charlie, that was one thing that you led quite a bit when we were working together, is just working production timelines to see what would make sense for the overall workload bandwidth.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, super, super helpful there. And all throughout this entire conversation, we've been talking about communication with client during the overall phase. The sales process does not end when they sign the dotted line. It continues forward for the next 3 to 6 months, making sure that if you're a founder-led sales team, that the overall experience with the founder matches the experience with the team, which is a huge discrepancy. More often than not, clients complain about with their previous experiences. And also making sure that we are just keeping them up to date. Different clients are different, right? Being dynamic. Once again, some clients would like to see the brief before it's actually put into production. Some clients do not care. Some clients just want to see the brief for the first one or two. What's been your experience there in terms of navigating that overall client partnership?
I think you have to ask the question as early as possible. And that's something that I know you did when we were on the last couple of onboarding calls that I did when we were working together, is ask that question, do you want to see the brief? Because, and I think I've actually mentioned this before on another podcast with you, but it's because it stung so much. It really like stuck in my brain. I actually had a client once who complained because we were asking for approval too many times. She was like, I'm paying you to do this, just go and do it. And I got it. Like, I get that. That is a completely valid client experience. But then we have other clients who won't let you move a pixel or change a hex code by like a tiny amount without their permission. So there is such a wide spectrum of expectations and like level of desire to be involved from the client. So it's your job as an agency to scope that out as early as possible. How early, how much involvement do you want? Because if I under involve you, you're going to be pissed, or sorry, unhappy. If I over involve you, you're also going to be unhappy. So it's on you as the agency to figure that out. And I think, yeah, you guys, we were doing such a good job of that, because then we want to set ourselves up for success as much as we want to set the client up for success, basically. Like, it's way better to proactively address these things than to reactively try and fix a negative experience.
Yeah, and we just had a client kickoff call Wednesday of this week. That's one caveat. I don't know if we've shared or not, but generally as an agency, we just do kickoff calls Wednesdays, Thursday, Fridays, because Monday, Tuesdays are generally pretty workload heavy and the team's getting into the flow. So one of the things that I brought up to the client was this is a mental health app. So I brought up Maslow's hierarchy as a visual example for the team. And I said, I may be beating a dead horse here. I know we've talked about what type of customer you're going after, but this is a startup. Overall brand messaging is one of the things that we're trying to figure out for them, because they haven't launched yet. They're in test flight. One of the things that slows down our partnership the most early on is alignment on messaging and making sure we know the words to say and not to say. And while we include that in our onboarding form, it's expected that a lot of that's going to be learned as feedback and revisions come. So even just having that part of the brief share can help reduce production timelines or
100%.
reduce delays in production timelines once they go.
And reduce the number of amends as well, because they can catch this kind of stuff early. And I think on that as well, what I would say was also super important is having a really good quality control checklist. So especially in those first few creative packages that you're delivering for a client, like you said, in the onboarding form, they've probably shared words that we can't use or phrases or anything that's kind of like off limits. But sometimes that doesn't get translated into the brand guidelines, and maybe the designer is looking at the brand guidelines or the copywriter. So I think like it's really important to just spend that time right at the beginning of that client relationship to create a client specific QC checklist. So we did this for every client when I was working with you guys, and I just called it the creative one pager, and it was just like a top level summary that everybody, I expected all the team to look at it. Like me as the creative strategist, I expected myself to refer back to it, the designer, the copywriter, and within that creative one pager was a client specific list of preferences. And that is exactly where you need to put everything that is the client has already communicated to you is really important to them. So if they're really fussy about line spacing, if there's specific things that you can't say or specific ways that you need to word stuff, it has to go in that client specific list. And you have to hold everybody in the accountable in the team to go back and check that list, because things fall through the cracks. And those are the really early client experiences that they remember. If you let things slip through the cracks and they think, I've already told you that and you've missed it. Wow, that's a really rubbish experience for first creative package that could have been entirely avoided.
Yeah, because there's so much momentum that builds up to that deliverable of handing over the creative. And you never want to just send a drive and say, let me know what you think. Like that's there's way too much free reign there. So we've covered quite a bit here. I know we're in the process behind the scenes for anybody listening of trying to shorten down our episodes. This is part 3 of building a high-level creative strategy process. In part 4, we're going to be focusing on the next chronological phase, which is the brief handover from the creative strategist to the graphic designer, and then management of the overall process and internal QC.